Think we're live.
I think we are live.
All right, it's happening.
We are live,
Let's
people.
go.
Do it.
How are you both doing tonight?
Good.
I am doing well. I'm a little cold, honestly. I put this dress on and I'm like, Alex, how does this look? What do you think? She's like, well, aren't you going to be cold? And I was like, it's only like 30 minutes. I'll be fine. And here I am, already cold. So.
What's the weather like over there?
It's been cloudy. There's sunshine for a couple minutes, but
Gotcha.
that mostly cloudy, kind of chilly.
Shoot.
Yeah. How about good old Minnesota today?
It's been the 60s. The sun has been out. People been walking. Me and my brother still need to do a run today, so that's still on the to-do list.
Wow. Yeah, honestly, there's been way more people outside now that everybody's quarantined.
Yeah. People have way too much time on their hands, you know?
Yeah.
That is exactly how it is out here in Philadelphia. I was like, man, Philadelphians just don't care. Just literally don't care. Everybody's out. I actually, if anything, I think that this is actually getting people to recommit to their New Year's resolution of like working out.
Good point. Good point. I mean,
I was just thinking about that the other day. Because everybody's out running, everybody's going on walks. I don't know.
It helps you put things into perspective of like what really matters when you're just bogged down in your house with your family, and it's like, oh, all right, let's get back to the basics, you know, the basics of human civilization.
Seriously. What's the climate like out in Minnesota? Not weather-wise, but just like everything going on.
Overall, I mean, I've only been here for like 2 days.
That's fair.
So as far as like the climate of like what's that atmosphere feel like, couldn't tell you. I mean, my house, we're good.
Yeah, you're in the suburbs anyways.
Yeah. We got a huge package of toilet paper because
nice essentials.
Yeah, tell me about it. My mom freaked out the other day because she went to like 6 different stores. And unfortunately, there was no toilet paper. And so I was giving my mom crap because I was like, Mom, we do not need this much toilet paper. She's like, if you were here 2 weeks ago and saw how bad it was out there, you would have been freaking out too. So
oh, gosh.
Been poking fun at her. But no, everyone, at least in like my mini environment here, everyone is doing pretty good.
That's
holding
great.
on to each other.
Good. Awesome. Well, I think we're gonna get this ball rolling. Welcome everybody. Welcome. My name is Lucas. I work with the Culture Projects. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We have a great night in store for everybody. Tonight we're going to be discussing Dr. Edward Sri's book, Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. And so the book is some reflections and kind of a synopsis on John Paul II's work, Love and Responsibility. And to discuss the book tonight, I'll be joined by 2 of our missionaries here at the Culture Project, both Jesse and Carrie. We'll let them introduce themselves here in a minute. But tonight we'll actually be discussing the first 2 chapters of the book. Chapter 1, speaking specifically about friendship, and chapter 2, we'll dive into John Paul II's thoughts on the sexual urge and sexuality. And so with that being said, we'll just continue to let everybody kind of come on into this call. Welcome. We're excited that all of you are here tonight. Jesse and Carrie, it's great to be joined by both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, as much as I could say that I was the one that invited you, anyways, I'm excited that both of you are here. Carrie, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself a little bit. Where are you from? Your backgrounds prior to the Culture or before the Culture Project. What'd you study? What year in the mission are you, and what team are you on?
Absolutely. So my name is Carrie, and it's Carrie with a K, which is very important. And I'm from central Minnesota. So I grew up on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, central Minnesota, which I loved. And I went to college for liturgical music and theology. But I've also always been like the tomboy, love sports, one of my favorite things. So being outside, being active. And I joined the Culture Project right out of college. So this is now my 2nd year. I've been in Toledo both years. So that's me.
Good old Toledo, God's
Oh,
country.
you know it.
How about you, Jesse?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I, as well, am from Minnesota. Currently, actually at home right now. I went to the University of Minnesota Duluth, studied biology, a big science guy. And super grateful to be here today with all of you and talk more about relationships. Kind of delve deeper with the thoughts of St. John Paul the Great from the mind of Dr. Edward Sri.
That's what I'm talking about. And just so everyone knows, my name is Lucas. Once again, I am originally from North Dakota, also God's country. Fun fact about North Dakota is our state slogan is just legendary. That's it. Really random fact if you needed to know one about North Dakota. I live in Philadelphia. I work in our headquarters here at the Culture Project. I'm a mission team manager, which means that I work directly with all of our missionaries and with our mission teams in their locations. So both Carrie and Jesse are on one of my teams out in Toledo, which is awesome. And then also the team in Cleveland. Big shout out to them as well. So just before we dive into the texts themselves and just our reflections and have a conversation following that, just a little layout of the land tonight. This is definitely more of a conversation. So there's definitely things that we want to talk about, make sure we hit. There's a lot here. And so I'll ask different questions and just kind of lead the conversation. But for any of you out there who have questions throughout the course of this, any comments you want to make, put those in the chat box. Towards the end of the call, we'll have the opportunity to dive into some of those and address anything that any of y'all might have questions on. And so with that being said, we'll just be, as I said, reflecting on some questions towards the end of each chapter in the book. Dr. Sri has detailed some questions throughout the course of it. We'll just kind of go from there. How's that sound to both of you, Carrie and Jesse? Fantastic. Awesome. Let's just jump right into this. So, here I gotta find my notes really quick. So chapter one, John Paul II lays out, I think probably his underlying principle of all of his teaching, all of his writings, especially leading into theology of the body. And that is something called the personalistic norm. And so that's a big phrase that initially probably I didn't really have any idea what that meant. So just some initial impressions from the both of you, what stood out regarding that and the rest of the chapter. If one of you, Jesse specifically, if you wouldn't mind just detail, what is the personalistic norm? What did John Paul, what did he mean by that? And maybe even examples of how you've seen that or how that's kind of manifested itself in your life.
For sure. And so to put it in his words, he actually defines it as a person must not merely be a means of an end for another person. And to put into my own words, what I get from it, what I derive from it is just one shall not be used, not to use another person. I think it really just centers around the dignity of the human person. What does the language of you speak? At the end of the day, knowing that, as fellow sons and daughters of Christ, we are good, we are beautiful just the way that we are. And when we as human beings live in this world, this culture of use, we're completely speaking the opposite of what God created us in, right? We are saying you're not good, you're not worth it, etc. And personally in my own life, I've seen this play out. To caveat, this was definitely, just prior to my conversion. And I particularly look at a friendship of mine, or a group friendship of mine back in high school. And it was me, my buddy Colin, Trev, and Joe. And they all know this, so this isn't exposing them type thing. But looking at that relationship, there's just a huge fiasco between Colin and Trevor over a gal. And because of that, me and Joe were put in a position.
Are they cool with you sharing this?
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, cool.
This has already been talked about. And yeah, because of that, like me and Joe were put in a situation where we had to choose like who we were going to hang out with, because they were just on such opposite ends in terms of their relationship. And looking back and really discerning that relationship, particularly what I chose, which was to spend more of my time with Colin, it really centered around, you know, Colin having the nicer house, Colin having a boat and jet skis and living on the lake, and just recognizing that, like, I would have a much better time hanging out with Colin than hanging out with Trev, you know? And not to say that, you know, I didn't love them, right? I mean, these were my buddies. We were the Fab Four. We all played sports together, particularly basketball. But it really just, looking back, goes to show the element of just like use, and how like my actions in that moment was just speaking to Colin of like, hey, like this is what your worth is to me, even though that wasn't necessarily spoken, and vice versa to then the other two men of, hey, like you guys aren't worth it to me because you don't have anything to offer in terms of what Colin had to offer. And so that's what I'd have to speak upon in regards to the personalistic principle.
Yeah, so that's all. It's so, everything you shared, Jesse, is spot on. I think for anybody out there who is, I'd imagine everybody's pretty familiar with John Paul II, but anybody who isn't familiar with his backstory, like where's he coming from in writing this, in the age that he was writing it, in the time of the world that he was writing it in. Carrie, would you be able to share a little bit as to kind of what's John Paul II's story in terms of the country that he grew up in, like what was going on at this time? You know, why would he be writing about this at this day and age?
Yeah, so pretty put on the spot here. Here we go. So I know that John Paul II is from Poland, and he was in the 20th century. So especially on World War II, I think is the big one. And I'm assuming that's what you're getting at with the Nazi regime, and essentially looking at the Jewish people and reducing them to nothing more than an object and telling them what their worth is. Because I think that's something with this personalistic norm that I right away jumped to, was like, well, why? Like, how do we like really explain this? And it's just in that we as human beings have free will, and that means we have the ability to make choices. But when you are simply like using someone as an object, you're taking away that free will, because you're then deciding for them what they're good for. So that's kind of exactly what was going on with the Nazis, telling the Jewish people that, well, they're not worth anything. Maybe they're worth like a little bit of work in some concentration camps, but certainly no more than that. So I think this is really what was going on in the world at the time that John Paul II was speaking to. So
Absolutely. Thanks for, hey, you knocked it out of the park getting put on the spot like that. Hey.
Yeah, my little brother will be proud. He's the history buff. So thanks, Jason.
That's great. No, and I think I think exactly what you hit on, Carrie. Like the time that he found himself in, you know, communism was on the rise, and the reign of Nazi Germany and coming into Poland and really a lot of Europe, and just the influence that had on humanity in general, but also like the quality of relationship, right? And how the human person was looked at, you know, along with really laying out this personalistic norm that John Paul II spoke so in-depthly about. He spoke about it in light of a reality which was called utilitarianism, right? So essentially use. It's a big word for use, right? And I think that, you know, once you put it in that terms, it's pretty safe to say, like, we look around the world and use is rampant. Would you guys agree? Like, it's pretty rampant. And I think especially, you know, for everybody out there, again, Carrie and Jesse are both missionaries here with the Culture Project, and they spend a good amount of their time in classrooms with middle school, high school students. They spend some time in college campuses and speaking to parents and things of that nature, and speaking on the nature of relationships and love and things of that nature. And specifically speaking against use. And so before I have the both of you share on just your experiences in the classroom and how you've spoken to that in today's day and age to the students of today and young people of today. How have you noticed or even experienced this utilitarianism use when it comes to relationships in your own life or just, in the world today? Whoever wants to go first, just throw it out there.
I can go ahead and, okay. All right, I'll jump in here. So yeah, this is something that's definitely a very tender topic because nobody wants to be used. And I think most people generally don't want to use others, but this does happen all the time. And I think I've noticed a lot of, in retrospect, seeing this, but I myself didn't even have the language at the time. So I think the biggest story that I think to back in college, it was senior year, and I started going out with this guy, and he was like kind of pretty shy, so he hadn't even like gotten the guts yet to like hold my hand or anything, and it'd probably been about a few weeks, maybe around a month, and he like finally got the nerve, and he asked if he could kiss me, and not too long after that, he asked me if I would go to his bedroom with him. And I, of course, said, no, I'm not going to do that. And that night when I left, that was actually the last time I ever heard from him, which, like, that really sucks because, I mean, his intentions right there were laid out on the table that you could see very clearly what he was after. So it's a sad reality. And just knowing, too, that to be thankful that I was able to say no, because otherwise I could have gone right in with that and thinking that it could have this mask of seeming like there was attraction, maybe even love. I mean, our world would very likely say that, oh, absolutely, that's love. As long as it's mutual, you're both okay with it. But just in him asking that question, you could right away see his motives. And unfortunately, they were use. So that's a tough story, but I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. So Jesse, do you have another story to share?
Yeah, I mean, right away what comes to mind was the beginning of my conversion journey. And back during my sophomore year, I remember going to Seek, and really like Seek, which is a focus conference for those of you who may not know, just like coming back and recognizing that like things in my life had to change. And a big part of that was my relationships. I remember just like sitting down on my bed, I'm just like praying to the Lord, just talking to him about my relationships and like scrutinizing through all these relationships that I have. Cause like, I knew a lot of people and was involved in all these different groups, but just sitting down and recognizing that like none of these relationships fit into the box that I wanted, like into a group of like individuals pushing me to go closer to Christ. And I just remember sitting there so distraught because I mean, even today, right? Like there's this whole goal of like, yeah, like have a bunch of friends and like, being popular and kind of being in the eyes of the world in the spotlight. And I think falling into kind of that mentality and sitting down and recognizing that like, whoa, like there's actually not too many people that I can really sit here and say, you know what, I'm going to trust you with, this struggle that I have, or I'm going to trust you with whatever it is that's going on within my life, or, hey, like I would speak to you about this aspect of my life. That was like really sobering because like, that's what I wanted. And that's what like everyone wants. Yet so many people, including I myself at that point in time, struggled to emulate my relationships in that way. And so that's definitely a story that comes to mind of just utilitarianism. Wow.
It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. Watch out. Watch out. It'll come up and bite you for sure.
Of how utilitarianism played in my life.
Yeah, no, thank you for your vulnerability. Seriously, this is one of those things that all of us have experienced or are currently experiencing. We're human, number one, but number two, we're made for relationship, and we find ourselves always in relationship in some way, shape, or form. And so the fact that we've all been burned by this type of attitude, right? This disposition towards other people, is something that we need to take a good look at, and John Paul II did that. And some more context on John Paul II, a lot of these reflections, you might be thinking, why was this celibate man spending so much time reflecting on the nature of sexuality and sex and relationships and marriage and all of this stuff as a priest? Like why? And here's
we need it.
well, that absolutely. But here's a man who spent so much time like ministering to people our age. And so for like any of you out there who find yourself post-college, who are probably around the same age as Carrie, Jesse, and I, and just anybody actually, the writings from this man and what he's speaking about come from a place of so much experience with the deep wrestlings of these individual people. And like you were talking about, Carrie, like those hurts, like those relationships that we've been burned by, or like Jesse, what you were talking about, like the dispositions that we see within ourselves. And he wanted to give people a roadmap to experiencing what we call here at the Culture Project, living fully alive, right? So really live the fullness of our humanity, and experience it as it was meant to be experienced. So I think it's really awesome that we have two of our missionaries here on the call tonight. And so just kind of going off of that, we'll get into friendship here in a moment, but Carrie, what are some things that when you go into the classroom and you're really speaking to this, like maybe a story that you have and speaking to a young girl about like really facing this reality, of like either being used or just like speaking truth into that person? And like, what was that like? Like, just share with us some stories. That would be great.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories that come to mind, because I think this is so common, even from like middle school and high school age. And I think a lot of this comes with the desire to fit in. We all have that desire. So I remember being at a high school and talking to the freshmen. We're giving sexual integrity talks to all of the freshmen that day. And at the end of the talk, one of the girls had shared that she knew that like there's this party coming up this weekend, and that there'd probably be things going on at this party that she knew she shouldn't and really didn't want to participate in. But she was just so torn of like, well, I want to fit in. Like, I want the upperclassmen to like see me and like me and be accepted. And that's like this truly this good desire that we have, but that is sometimes what can then lead us into like being okay with being used. So it's really tough. I mean, it's great to talk about it on paper of like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Like, of course, we don't want to allow ourselves to be used or to use others. But when it comes down to it, and it comes down to like, I can go to this party and I don't know what's going to happen. There might be use happening, or I cannot go, but then I might not fit in and I might be the outcast. And like, that's hard. So I think that's just one of the most common themes that you see, is that so often, because our world is so just what's the word I'm looking for? Marinated in like this use, and it's just so normalized. It's tough to like live the virtuous way. Mm-hmm. And you see that like time and time again in these kids' lives. So
absolutely. And I think marinated is a great word for it.
Well,
that describes it very well. Which I think what you just shared, Carrie, transitions really well into like the second part of this first chapter that Dr. Shree is detailing on John Paul's writings. When it comes to friendship, like so many of us find ourselves so often in relationships of use, or relationships where we have to compromise because the quality of relationship isn't what we're meant to experience, right? And so, Jesse, could you speak a little bit as to, well, first off, John Paul II he detailed in here the three types of friendships based on Aristotle's teaching, utility, pleasant friendship are the first two. We won't spend as much time there, but the third form, virtuous friendship. Jesse, what in your life has the experience of virtuous friendship been like? Or even now being at the Culture Project, like what has that been like in comparison to what you were speaking about earlier, those relationships that you really had to take a look at?
Yeah, I think it's funny looking back to, college days and seeing the journey that the Lord has put me down on now, which was just not foreseen at all. But just being surrounded by men and women that truly care about me, like truly desire like my good. And it's been a beautiful experience, especially here within the Culture Project, to see what true authentic love looks like. Because in reality, like a lot of kids that we even speak to, like they don't have the tools that we receive within, our mission of what it actually looks like to be a man or to be a woman and live in the freedom of that. And for myself, I can think of my good friend, actually, Joe, as I mentioned earlier, and we have just been on this journey of Catholicism together. We came into the faith together. He's a revert, I'm a convert, but like step by step, we just kind of walked the way. And there's such a freedom that I have with him, as well as other, men and women within my life, but particularly with him, there's such a freedom of just being able to be received by him, like as his brother, and vice versa. I know there's a freedom for him to just live in the goodness of just like, here's a brother who just desires to receive me as I am, not like, Joe who has all his stuff together, but just like, yo, Joe, like it's a Friday. How are you doing today? Like, let's talk about whatever it is that your life experience is. And so there's just such a freedom living in the virtuous friendship.
Absolutely. I just want to take a second. We've been chatting for a little bit. Just want to welcome anybody who has joined the call throughout the course of our conversation so far. We're talking tonight about Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love, the book written by Dr. Edward Sri. And we've just been talking about the personalistic norm, what John Paul II meant by that, right? The fact that the human person isn't meant to be a means to an end, that we're made for love. Not only that, but we're made for this elevated form of relationship, this beautiful, virtuous friendship. And so why is it that you think, Carrie, that the majority of friendships don't ever actually make it to the level of virtuous friendship?
That's a good question. I know that it is like so we have the three types of friendships. We have utility, that's the use, more of like the business exchange, and then the pleasant friendship. I think that one's like really common because like it's not necessarily wrong to bond over something with somebody and like go to an event and really have your friendship united in like perhaps going to football games or to like liking the same band, or just being in the same location. But then as soon as that's gone, then it seems like that friendship kind of fades away. So it can be tough just to break beyond that, because like it's not wrong to go to football games with friends or to enjoy certain things with each other, and taking that next leap of faith further, like it is exactly that. Like it's a leap of faith to put yourself on the line and to be vulnerable with them and let them know like how you're seeking to grow. What is that greater good? Because that virtuous friendship is when two people, I think the way that he says it is they're in pursuit of a common goal, the good life. So the moral life that's found in virtue. So that really requires that vulnerability of sharing where you're at, because of course no one can help you to grow in virtue if they don't know where you're starting from. So I think that vulnerability is a big piece, and also that willingness to call others on, in a sense of being honest with them about where they're at, and sometimes like saying the things that are harder to hear, but are the things that they need to hear in order to grow in that virtue. So I think it's really just taking that courage to step out, to say the things that might be hard to say, to receive the things that are harder to receive. And I think that vulnerability is also a really big hinge on making it to that virtuous friendship.
Absolutely. There's a question that I would love. Somebody posted it here in the chat box. Comes from Hannah. Shout out to Hannah. Great question. She asked, how can someone tell if you're being used in a relationship, and how would you go about having that conversation? I think before we move on to the rest of the second chapter, that's super pertinent to what we're talking about when it comes to friendship, but also the first part, right, regarding the personalistic norm and use. How would someone go about that? Who wants to take a stab at that? Who would like to take a stab at that question? I think Jesse does. Jesse, I'm gonna put you on the spot, man. I'm gonna put you on the spot, man.
Cool.
That's a great question,
That's
Hannah.
a great question. Thank you for that, Hannah. I think, so going back to the personalistic principle is the recognition that we as human beings, right, and like the side of God, like we are good, right? I mean, that's what it hinges upon. And then the principle is, right, like not demeaning a person to the element of use. And so one, I think it's important for anyone to surround themselves with people that are going to hold you accountable to being like the man or woman that like the Lord has made you to be. I think that is huge, whether it be family members, whether it be friends, of just like being reminded of the good that we are as human beings. Because when we're not in environments that are conducive towards, living the virtuous life, it's much more difficult to live it. And so with that, as far as having conversations, whether it be, a dating relationship, a friendship, so on and so forth, it's actually kind of funny. John Paul, or Edward Sri, from the Mount of Edward Sri, talks about how a lot of times when there's no foundations to relationships, we avoid these types of conversations because naturally we don't want to cause conflict. But even though that may be a potential reality, it's important to say what needs to be said of like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing with this relationship. And like, I want to know your input and like what your thoughts are and what's going on, whether it be this friendship, so on and so forth. So you're able also to understand the mind of the other person, like where they're coming from. Because who knows, like maybe they haven't as well been fed with the tools to be, the man or woman Christ has called them to be. And so always give the benefit of the doubt, I would say as well with that. You have anything to add with that, Carrie?
Yeah, I think just very practically thinking about this, I am brought to mission in moments, maybe it's like an evening and you have more kind of free time that you can do with what you want. And let's say like I have a blog that has been hanging over my head that I need to finish, definitely speaking from personal experience. And one of my teammates might say like, oh yeah, like let's watch a movie tonight. Like that'd be super fun. Like let's do this together. And then like, like I have this blog to write, like I'm not really sure. And if my teammate would then respond of like, oh, come on, like you don't need to do that. And like, you should just come on, just watch the movie. And while like, mind you, like there can be times where like you really do need to be pulled out of yourself. But if it is just kind of that self-seeking, like, well, I want to watch this movie and like, I want to have fun with you and you can be like an aid to me having a fun time, then that can kind of be being able to tease out whether or not that's use. And then those moments actually can be moments of like loving me when like I need to write a blog and they say them like have that invitation to the movie and I say like, I have to write this blog, but like I really want to. And they're like, you know what, Carrie, like, no, like we're not going to watch a movie. Like you need to write this blog. And they like choose to like leave me alone in a room to write a blog, which is like tough, but that's really what I needed. And like truly being loved, like what was my good and not just like their good of like, well, I want to watch a movie. So I think that's kind of a practical example of how to tell of like whose good is this focusing on, which can like flip back and forth depending on the situation. And then I would totally echo that, like when having conversations about it, really keeping it on yourself and your own experience and understanding like, well, this is how I'm receiving this. It seems like this is happening. Like, can you let me know what this is like on from your perspective, just to clear the air, get it all out there instead of jumping immediately to like the accusations and stuff like that, just to start things off that way. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I think we could go home, folks. That's some top grade advice right there. Carrie, JL, some good stuff. And I think just to your point there, Carrie, like it's like that experience that you just talked about, like where of being in community, like virtuous friendships, like it's not this big glamorous thing, like it's really simple, honestly. And I think something that actually, just a quick little snippet, like something that really attracted me to the organization of the Culture Project was here you had like a group of people, and I was coming from a ministry background where I was surrounded by tons of incredible people to begin with, here was another group of people who, like, there was something so simple in how they lived and how they loved, but yet that was the power. You know what I mean? Like, that in and of itself is what John Paul II is really getting at when he talks about the virtuous friendship and the pursuit of that common goal, that common good, which is the other person and their good, firstly. And then this greater mission as it comes and things like that. But that's great stuff. So we'll transition a little bit. With that, I just want to recognize everybody who's watching live right now. Bianca, I see you. Shout out to Bianca. Shout out to Peter. Everybody else who's been hanging out with us. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us, for your comments, for your questions. Right now, what we'll do, we'll transition a little bit into chapter 2. So again, John Paul II, he really details first for us that personalistic principle, right? And use, and really contrasting the two of them and how they manifest in friendship and what form of friendship we're called to. And with that, he then dives deeper into sexuality, right? And he spends a lot of time reflecting upon the nature of sexuality, and the reality that sexuality, he knew, was going to be one of the main areas in which people use another person, right? And, you know, to my point earlier, this is why this celibate priest spent so much time reflecting on sex, especially when it comes to what he called the sexual urge. And so he spends so much time reflecting on the sexual urge. And I think initially that probably catches some people off guard, just the terminology. John Paul II, if you know anything about him, he had his own terminology for things. He was a philosopher. He spoke about these principles in a way that really nobody else I've ever seen did. And so when it comes to that, you know, he says specifically that the sexual urge manifests itself in the tendency for human persons to seek the opposite sex, right? So he's talking about that attraction to the physical and to the psychological characteristics of the opposite sex, right? So as a man, a woman, and a woman, a man, and how like those attributes we're attracted to, because that's what's complementing us, right? And so at one point, Dr. Edwards III details what John Paul was talking about when he said that the sexual urge isn't an attraction to the physical or psychological qualities of the opposite sex in the abstract. Do you guys remember that part when he was talking about that?
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, would you be able to talk about, like, what does he mean in the abstract? Like, what was he getting at? What does Dr. Sri talk about in that part?
Yeah, so I think what he was just trying to get at there was, we as human beings, like, we're not just attracted to, you know, let's say a feature on a certain person, but like, rather the sexual urge, this like desire for the physical / the emotional, leads us to want, if we choose so, to get to fully actually know the other person. And oftentimes I think as human beings, it's important that, because I mean, you think of, let's say, going back even to Adam, our experience today, and it's just like bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, so on and so forth. And you think of us, right, in the moment where, you know, personally speaking for myself, I encounter the beauty of woman, like, it's more than just the physical or the emotional. Like, in that moment, I'm being invited to so much more. And sometimes it's, hey, you know what? Like, I'm walking down the street, I see this beautiful woman, and, you know, it's just like, appreciate her beauty, praise God, and move on with my life. Or maybe sometimes it's engaging in the conversation to get to know that person for who she is, so on and so forth. And so there's really a beautiful aspect of, like, yeah, it's not the, you know, hey, I'm Jesse and I'm attracted to X, Y, and Z, you know, feature, but more so of just like, I see beauty, and like, in that moment, how am I going to encounter what God has allotted.
Absolutely. Yeah. John Paul talks about how the sexual urge is always ordered to a person, right? It's always geared towards a person, right? It's not like, oh, I'm attracted to the blondness of a person, right?
Right.
No, it's like when you say that out loud, that sounds ridiculous, because it is ridiculous, by the way. No, but you're attracted to a woman who happens to be blonde. You know what I mean? And he saw that, like, that spirit of use tries to separate, right? And how, like, to really get to the heart of how do we, like, refix this is we have to take a step back and realize that I'm attracted to another human being, like another person, right? Just want to shout out Long. Long has a great question. He said that John Paul II emphasizes that the sexual urge must not be seen as an impulse, but rather as an orientation towards human aspiration. Human aspiration. Can you please elaborate and explain? Who wants to take that one?
Can you repeat the question one more time for me?
Yeah. I saw you were
I'm like
going over that one. Yeah.
Ready to go.
Yeah. So he says that John Paul II, also Long, great question. John Paul II emphasizes that the sexual urge must not be seen as an impulse, but rather as an orientation towards human aspiration. Can you please elaborate and explain? Is this you wanting to take a stab at it, Carrie?
I'm really thinking here. What the heck? We'll take a stab at it. So, yeah. So I think one thing that John Paul II says here is that the person is in control of the sexual urge, not the other way around. So it's not simply an impulse that, like, we must act on, because that's more of that animalistic, that, like, if you put a steak in front of a dog, the dog is going to eat the steak. But, like, we human beings have that intellect and that will to make choices. So this sexual urge might, like, take place like that. We don't have a choice whether or not that happens, but that next step is what we do have the choice of, like, what are we going to do with this? And we can, like, either let it be just like that use and allowing it to be something that is self-serving and, like, what I'm going to get out of this, or it can be like that next step into, like, really getting to know the heart of that person. So I'm forgetting the second half of the question there. Was there another piece to that?
Yes. So he said, I think you addressed the impulse piece of that, but Long is asking, John Paul II emphasizes that the sexual urge must not be seen as an impulse, but rather as an orientation towards human aspiration. And can you please elaborate and explain? I think you did a great job of detailing the impulse, like, simply acting upon it is more of that animalistic tendency. I think it actually leads into this next question that I wanted to chat about. At one point in the course of his writing, and Dr. Street talks about it in the book as well, he talks about how that the sexual urge provides the material, like the raw material for love. I just think that that's just, like, such a fascinating way to describe it. And well, before I give my answer, Jess, you want to take a stab at, like, what was he talking about when he said it provides the raw material for love, and maybe even, like, tying that into that second part that Long was getting at? I think that actually fits right in there.
Yeah. So he talks about the sexual urge kind of presenting us with a choice, right? This choice of loving the person or using them for their attributes. And I know it kind of uses an example of a man, Jim, meeting Mary, right? And Jim encountering Mary can either choose to, upon encountering her beauty, what draws him into noticing her, and he can either choose to sit there and, choose lust, or it can instead choose to go up to her, to introduce himself, to get to know her for who she is, and potentially build a friendship from that. And so with these attractions that rise spontaneously, we have this opportunity either in that moment to, like, again, choose love, or to choose not to love. And I think that raw material presented is a beautiful aspect of life. I mean, you think of, married couples today, right? It took that spontaneous, just like, wow, like I'm very attracted to this woman. Wow, I desire to know her, and vice versa, right? For that material being created there, that again was spontaneous, for them both to kind of enter into that under their own intellect and their will and choose, like I desire to get to know, Jasmine for who she is. And like, I hope for the same, and boom, you see beautiful married couples from that. So yeah,
absolutely.
Any thoughts on that, Lucas?
Yeah, no, I think you hit on a lot of really great stuff. And I think, again, just the nature of how John Paul II, not only did he write, but just his thoughts on John Paul II was fascinated with the human person. Like, here's a man who is deeply in love with the human person. And he saw in his reflections and just in life and encountering certain people and ministering to people, even though he was a celibate as a priest, like he saw the sexual urge as this framework to aspire to something bigger, right? Like to aspire to this elevated love, if you will, and this expression of that. And as you said, Carrie, like that impulse is that more animalistic, and that's actually that's not in line with who we are as human persons, just to simply choose to respond or to react, right? But rather, as you said, Jesse, we have that intellect, we have that will that informs our decisions, and actually we have the capacity to choose what is truly good and to order that to a person, towards a person, and I think just the level, the bar that John Paul II throughout his writings sets is, I think, what you were getting at, Long, just that opportunity to human aspiration. Yeah, great question. We got another question from Peter. Peter, I love you, man. We'll actually address that question next week. We'll address that question next week when we talk about sentimentality. Please tune back in next week, Peter. We'll address it then. But really great question. Awesome. How are you both doing? How we doing?
Doing well.
Yeah. You guys have any? Y'all have any other thoughts as we wrap up here?
I actually do. So this is what's kind of just bringing to my mind. If someone's hearing about this for the first time, I would imagine that you hear okay, there's this really holy guy talking about the sexual urge. He's probably going to be talking about how to resist it, how to put out the fire, but just how radical it might seem that he's no, this is good. It's at least an opportunity for something so good that it can be that catalyst to love, which I think is so freeing, especially in a lot of people grew up with a sense of their faith of Catholicism, perhaps, that sexuality is bad and something to be pushed aside, that we shouldn't talk about. But he's bringing it right out in the light and saying no, your sexuality is good. It's not only good, but the Lord has created it, and he has a purpose for it, and it's for this greater good, this love. So I think just that, it might sound kind of simple, but just the very fact that he's celebrating our sexuality is so important, especially in the world that we're living in. Yes, at the core, this is a good. And it's all about how we go about fulfilling that desire, that the world's got a little bit twisted in a whole lot of ways, but at the core is good. So I think that's just so beautiful, because that really is just what then leads to this authentic love. So
Amen. Wow. Jesse, you want to follow that up, bro?
That was very well put. So I have nothing to say.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
She took the words out of my mouth.
Hey, you and me both, man. I didn't even know I had them there, honestly. I didn't even know, but she sure did. No, that's great. What was that?
I was just gonna say that feminine genius there.
Hey.
I gotta bring that to the call.
Thing.
The only female representing. So.
Oh goodness, I love it. I love it so much. Once again, just thank you everybody who has been with us this whole time. All of the questions, everything has been really, really awesome. Before we wrap up here, just any last thoughts? Carrie, I know you just dropped a bomb on all of us, but any last thoughts from either of y'all? Just maybe some encouragements when it comes to pursuing virtuous friendships or finding oneself in that cycle of use and getting out of it, or, you know, what have you, regarding everything we've been talking about? Any last words that you might share with our audience tonight?
Yeah, I guess I'll just start off by saying pray. And when I say pray, like prioritizing times of letting Jesus know like what is going on within your life, like that, like just giving your heart to him in those moments, like, hey God, X, Y, Z is going on, but also taking time to really scrutinize and think over the relationships that the Lord has presented to you, whether it be family members, whether it be friends, whether it be coworkers, so on and so forth, and like bringing these relationships to the Lord. Because when we do this, we're then really able to see like, okay, like what is going on here? Like, where's this relationship at? So on and so forth. And so I would say bring your relationships to prayer, and just ask the Lord like how you can be a better friend, a better boyfriend or girlfriend, a better coworker, in terms of that relationship with coworkers, so on and so forth. So that's kind of what I got. Any thoughts, Carrie?
Yeah, that's great. And what I was going to say is, first of all, just to not overthink it, because I think my immediate response when I like read about these like types of friendship was overthinking every single friendship I've had in the past and like freaking out that I've never had a real friendship and they've all been about like use in some way, and maybe it was like that pleasure
We've all
friendship.
been
So it's
there.
like,
We've
no,
all been there.
but just like
Yep.
just like going crazy because I'm just like way overthinking. So I think exactly what Jesse said, just like bringing it to the Lord. And I think the other big piece there is that like mercy and forgiveness, and like knowing that none of us are perfect, and we like this takes practice. This is something that we're never going to become a master of, most likely. So just having that like mercy and forgiveness for yourself in the ways that you perhaps have fallen into that use, in the little ways or in the big ways, and just knowing that whatever's happened yesterday doesn't have to define what happens tomorrow. And just taking a step forward and like pursuing that virtuous friendship, just like gung ho, like let's do this. So that's my encouragement.
Man, I am amped. Carrie, every single time you share, I just get amped. Everybody in the comments, is getting amped too. Jeez, I got some goosebumps. No, that's great. And so just to recap before we close, chapter 1, John Paul II really lays out the personalistic norm, right? A person must not merely be a means to an end for another person, right? And he contrasts that with utilitarianism, use. And he then goes into talking about how the highest form of friendship provides the foundation for two persons to really pursue a common aim and a common goal. And that's the good of the other and the good of really mankind. Right? He talks about sexuality when it comes to the desire to remind us that sexuality is a big area where people will use each other. And so he actually talks about, Dr. Street talks about in the end of the second chapter, how John Paul II wants to remind us of how we have to be aware of the interactions with the opposite sex. We don't have to be super hyper like conscious and like scrupulous or anything like that, but he is more so coming from this place of like to really be aware of am I truly loving, right? Like, am I truly loving and wanting the good for this person? And then when he talks about the sexual urge, he talks about the attraction to the opposite sex and how it provides a raw material framework for authentic love. Just gold. So with that being said, thank you guys for joining. We threw a ton out there. Hopefully you received a lot from it. Carrie, Jesse, thank you so much for joining us, for being a part of this discussion with me. You guys had such great things to share, so thank you very much. And as you can tell, the mission of the Culture Project, it continues even in the midst of this quarantine. We're going digital. We're bringing this message of love and life to the internet, to Facebook Lives near you. So with that being said, just please consider to make a gift to help us during this time at thecultureproject.org/donate, because we really need your help to continue this mission, whether there's quarantine or not. And our mission continues because of the sacrifice and the generosity of people who believe in this mission, who believe in what it is that John Paul II set out to do, and who believes in what it is that we're setting out to do as well. So with that being said, just join us next Friday at the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to be going over chapters 3 and 4, where John Paul lays out his thoughts on attractions and then also the role of sentimentality, or what he likes to talk about with emotional attractions. Anyways, with that being said, thank you guys for joining. Carrie, Jesse, thank you for your time. You guys are great. God bless everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.